I'm going to go back and forth. Back and forth. Hey, sit down. Come on. Sit down anywhere. Get done. Sit down in the other spot right there by Major. Sit by Major. There you go. She is. At school or? You got this? Okay, here we go. Y'all ready? Here we go. Y'all ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you ready? Oh yeah, we had to put a song book on that lamp last time. There you go. Well, good evening. Y'all ready? Are you sure? Okay, here we go. Ready? Without looking at your card. Oh, yeah, let's try this. Let's go as far as we can without the card, okay? And I'll just do them in order. I won't even try to trick you. David said Saul and Jonathan were swifter than eagles and stronger than what? Hey, is that the same card you got? No. We're not on these cards. What card do I have? Do y'all all have this card? Well, we're doing this one tonight because that's what we all got. There's a different set of cards. You got it? Let me have this. Okay. Oh, now you can't look at your card. All right. Just put your cards away. They don't exist anymore. I knew that one was wrong when I read it. Okay. Number of books in the Old Testament. 39. I don't have a new one for you. Just sit down and we'll get on going. 39. All right. What's the first 5 books of the Old Testament? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Okay, great. What does Genesis mean? Yeah, no, I don't have that. I don't have any extras, okay? What does it mean? Beginning, okay. What does Exodus mean? Exit or going out. Okay. Now, this one we didn't do a lot, so we'll work together on this one, okay? We didn't do it a lot, so we'll work together. The main characters of Genesis. Okay, who's the first man in Genesis? Adam. Okay, who built a boat? It's on your shirt. Noah. Okay. Who else is in the Old Testament? Abraham. Okay. Who was in Egypt? Jacob. Okay. And Joseph. Great. Okay, so Adam, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph. Okay, great. All right, who was the evil king in Egypt? Pharaoh. Great. All right. What do we read about in Exodus chapter 20? I'll give you 10 guesses. 10 what? Commandments. Great, commandments. Okay, let's see. What happened to Nadab and Abihu? Say it again. Okay, the oxen stumbled, but that's a different story. Nadab and Abihu. They were priests. And they offered strange fire. Okay. Do y'all know? They were burned with strange fire. Great. Okay, let's see. All right, y'all know this one because I know we've done this one. The number of years between the numberings. 40. Okay. Let's see. Who took the place of Moses? Not Joseph. Joshua. Okay. All right. I will give y'all a new one next week, but for some reason, and I've learned a great lesson, okay? Don't print 2 blue cards near each other in time because I'll end up giving you the wrong ones, and that's what happened. That's all on me. So next week, I'll hand you a correct card. I even have already spotted them in the auditorium. So next week, you'll get you a new card, okay? Let's see. Can you tell me what Joshua 24:15 says? What did he say about his family? Choose You, this, no. Day, no. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. What were those? Days. Choose you this day. Great, okay. All right. How many judges were there? 15. Look at you. Okay. All right. Let's do four more, and then we'll be done. Who is the strong judge? Samson, okay. Now, what is, okay. What is the love story of the Old Testament? Ruth, okay, great. Who was anointed by Samuel? 2. Saul and David. Okay. Who is the, I know, buddy, we'll yell it. Who's the wisest man? Solomon. Okay, now individually, I'm going to ask y'all all one question, and you're all going to give me the same answer. Now, I'm going to start right here and go all the way down. What is the education emphasis theme? All right, education emphasis theme. Education emphasis theme. Live a Christian. All right. Education emphasis theme. Education emphasis theme. Education emphasis theme. Okay, go be city where you're going to be tonight.
I'll be singing This World Is Not My Home, 526. This world is not my home. First and last verse. This world is not my
stars in my nose. Boy,
I'll be singing number 3 at the cross. I'll be singing number 3 at the cross.
I
Next song is 161. 161.
I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy stock in Duracell because we go through batteries like nobody else. I don't know what's going on. I want to share with you a couple of images as we get started. Things that maybe will bring about a word to your mind. Here's the first image. Nice little man with a paper-made frowny face. Here is the second. Here is a meeting of some kind, and let me ask you this. Do you think it's going well? I'd rather not attend. How about you? Here's image number 3. Now, I can draw a mean stick man, but I don't want to ever take a class that's headed with this title, the most difficult subjects to draw and how to draw them. That might be what you want to do, but I don't know about you. I'm out. Here's number 4. Here's a man running up some steps. When's the last time you ran up steps? With the steps crumbling underneath your feet. Here's the next. Here's a young man doing homework. But what you don't see is slightly off picture is mom and dad trying to help him with the homework. That's even worse. Here's number next. Here's a man pushing a red ball up a hill, and here's a man pushing a red ball up some stairs. Difficulty. Difficulty. Our lesson tonight is entitled, The Most Difficult Word to Say. Now, the reason I used the pictures is because my original introduction got so complicated I knew I couldn't do it. Here's why. I Googled the most difficult words to say to get a list. I didn't know how to pronounce any of them. And I didn't think you would either, so I just left them alone. So I found some images that seemed to be difficult that go along with that idea of 1 John 2, there 13 through 15. The idea of being drawn away from the world, having to deal with temptation and sorrows and things that enter into the world, things that become problematic. How do we deal with those things? Now, to do that, what I want us to do is look at the most difficult word. And I want to use 4 illustrations for our consideration. Now, I'm going to give you the illustrations, and then at the last of our lesson, we'll make it sure that we know what the most difficult word is, even though we'll see it through our lesson a number of times. We're going to use in illustrative form to illustrate this word. We're going to use an evil and good type. We're going to look at Pharaoh in Exodus 5. You go ahead and turn there. We'll be there for just a few moments. And we're going to see him in the evil side. Then we're going to go over to Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. If you're in the Lads and Leaders program this year, that verse is going to mean something to you. We'll see that in just a minute. To see someone who was good and who used this word in their lives. Then we'll move over to the New Testament. We'll go to Acts chapter 5. Our last 2 segments fall in Acts chapter 5. And we will see a man and his wife of whom did not tell themselves this word. And then we'll stay in Acts chapter 5 and go down to the last 3rd division of that chapter. And we're going to see Peter and the other apostles there in Acts chapter 5. And we're going to see them use that word in their lives. And then when we're done, we'll illustrate that word with 2 letters. Let's start off in Exodus chapter 5. And I want you to center your minds in Exodus chapter 5. And I want you to go with me to verse 2. Exodus chapter 5, verse 2. Here we have the people of God. We have the people of God in Egypt. And this great illustrative question comes in this first encounter with Pharaoh. God has sent his people to Pharaoh. They have asked Pharaoh inside of verse 1 if he will let his people go. And listen to verse 2. Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." Now, we don't see the exact word of the hardest word, the most difficult word to say, but we see the illustrative form of it here. I promise at the end of our lesson I'll make it real clear. But here is Pharaoh. I'm not going to do that. I don't know who this God is. I don't know who He is. And then God begins to show him who He is. In chapter 6, you start to walk through and you look at chapter 6, verses 1 through 13, and you see these things begin to take place. Chapter 6, really looking at verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, for with a strong hand I will let them, or he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land." And look at verse 2. And God spoke to Moses and said to him, "I am the Lord." Here is Pharaoh. He has a heart of stone. And as you walk these things forward, as you see things happen from chapter 5 to chapter 6 to chapter 7, you look at chapter 7, verse 13, and you notice these words, "And Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them as the Lord had said." And thus these 10 plagues are beginning on Egypt. Each of these plagues, if you'll trace them down to their roots or to their actual meaning, you will see all the little g gods of Egypt be destroyed by the God of heaven. All because Pharaoh used a premise, used a concept, used the most difficult word in the wrong way. And he would not let his people, or let God's people go. You go over to Exodus chapter 14, and you see the totality of the decisions of Pharaoh, who had a heart of stone. In Exodus 14, you look down to verse 28, and you read this way, "Then the waters returned," and notice this, "and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh, that none that came into the sea after them, not so much as one of them remained." In that great pursuit after letting Israel go, the army of Pharaoh was destroyed, all because he used the most difficult word that's ever spoken. Let's move now, in the second place, to one that's a little bit better. Go with me to Genesis chapter 50. Now, toward the tail end of Genesis 50, matter of fact, really at the beginning of the scenes of God's people in Egypt, you have Genesis 50, and I want you to go down with me to verse 20. Genesis 50, verse 20. And then we're going to back up and see how all of this took place with this idea of no. Pharaoh told the Lord that he would not. Here we're going to see some young men who told themselves they would not restrain themselves. In Genesis 50, verse 20, Joseph, who has a heart of good, is interacting with his brothers. We'll see what they did in just a moment, though I think you know. But he says this in Genesis 50:20. "But as for you, you meant it against me, or you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as is this day, to save many people alive." After being sold again, after being put into servitude, after going to prison, after continuing to help Pharaoh, after serving Pharaoh, after his family comes home, here is the heart of Joseph. And he refused himself to do evil. We go back to Genesis 37, and we'll briefly do this. Genesis 37, we look at verse 11. After telling his family of one of the dreams of which he had, and the Bible tells us this dream came from the Lord. Genesis 37:11, "And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind." His brothers envied him. Now, I'm not going to make you raise your hand or not, but have you ever been jealous of someone or envied them? It usually does not lead to a road of which you should travel. And his brothers, he held these things against him. And as we follow this out, as we see the scenes go, we find ourselves in verse 32. After selling their brother, the one of whom had this dream, the one of whom they envied, after selling their brother, they concocted this plan. We read verse 32. They go to their father. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, of which belonged to Joseph. And they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether or not it's your son's tunic or not?" Of course they knew. They had covered it in blood. They had torn it and tattered it. And they brought it to the father. So they sold their brother into long-term Egyptian slavery. How'd they get there? They envied their brother. You make yourself over to Genesis 39. 39 verse 23. And you read these words of something that happens to Joseph. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Then Genesis 50 verse 20. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Here is an individual who refused something in his life. We'll see the word here in just a moment. Move with me to Acts chapter 5. Let's see, from evil to good, evil to good. Acts chapter 5, we have an occasion where something that takes place could have been simple. I don't know if you've ever done this or not, but sometimes we take the simple things and we make them the most difficult. Acts chapter 5 is one of those occasions. We have a husband and wife here. We read about them in verse 1. Ananias with Sapphira, his wife. But read with me verse 11. So great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things. Well, what things were heard? Well, verse 1, we learn about them. Verse 1, we learn what they did. They sold a possession. Let me ask you this. Is there anything wrong with selling a possession? If there is, we got a big problem, folks. Because how many of us have possessions? It's not the selling of the possession that was the problem. It was not the selling of a possession that caused the great fear to come upon the church and all those who heard these things. Verse 2 tells us this. He kept back part of the proceeds after selling a possession, his wife being aware also of it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. What was the problem? Here's all the money that I made. There was a lie to be told. And a husband and wife would not restrain themselves. So we read, as we follow these things out, inside of verse 4 and 5, hearing these words, he fell down. Inside of verse 8, tell me whether you sold the land for so much. Yes, for so much, perpetuating the lie, not knowing what had happened. Verse 9. And verse 10, then immediately she fell down and breathed her last breath. So great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things. Interestingly enough, this word fear here is used a number of ways inside of Scripture. Two of the main ways, at least, has to do with this, not just reverential fear, but shaking in the boots fear. Literally scared because of what has transpired. Oddly enough, this same word is also used in the husband and wife relationship in the way the wife reverences her husband. Here they were in fear of the things that had been done by God. But we have two people who were unwilling to use a word. Go with me down to the last part of the chapter. I want you to pick up with me inside of really verse 18, but I want you to go down to verse 29 to read it first, because that's where the scenes of what we're going to see is going to take place. But Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. That's true, isn't it? We ought to obey God rather than men. Well, what took place? Well, go back up to verse 18. We have some men in Acts chapter 5, verse 18, who have been put into prison and laid their hands on the apostles and put them in the common prison. Why? Because the high priest, verse 17, and all those who were there were filled with indignation. I like to say about the word indignation is they were filled with indigestion. They could not stand the people that were in it. It was just bubbling up from them. There's the indignation that was found by these. So they put them in prison. We read inside of verse 19 that the angel comes and opens the doors and tells them to go and speak at the temple, verse 20. Verse 25, as this trial is going on, as these things are taking place, everybody's wondering what the outcome's going to be. One says, verse 25, "Look at the men whom you put in prison are standing at the temple teaching the people." Well, what were they teaching the people? Well, survey the book of Acts, and you will find, and I will find, that those who taught about the application of who Jesus was and what Jesus does for you and I, for people. That is the message of which was preached in the book of Acts. And here they were, arrested for preaching that message. They were released to preach that message again. And here those who put them in prison look afar and they see them doing it again. Verse 28, "Did we not strictly command you to not teach in this name? And here you've done it again." Verse 29, "We ought to obey God rather than men." I want you to notice verse 42 as well. "And daily in the temple and in every house they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ." Here is Peter, who had a heart of truth. Now what I want you to do is go back with me. Let's go all the way back to Pharaoh. And let's try to find the most difficult word to say. What was Pharaoh's problem? "Nor will I let Israel go." Who has asked Pharaoh to let his people go? God has. And what was Pharaoh's answer? No. All right. Let's look at the second. Joseph, a heart of good. What did Joseph do? You look at Genesis 50, verse 20, and you may wonder to yourself, well, where did Joseph say no? Maybe you think to Genesis 37 when he was telling his family of his dream. Or Genesis 37, 32 when the scenes concerning his selling and his being taken into Egyptian bondage. Or you see him in prison later on in Genesis 39. Where did he say no? Well, go study Joseph. And see, when his brothers came, Joseph told himself no. He could have gotten even, couldn't he? He could have used the entire power of the kingdom of Egypt to put his brothers in their place. But he told himself no. One has told God no, the other has told himself no. Joseph, a heart of gold. Ananias and Sapphira, here we have another group, another people on the evil side of things in Acts chapter 1, or Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. How did they use the word no? Well, they would not tell themselves no. There was nothing wrong with selling a possession. There was nothing wrong with giving some of it to the church. But how did they report it? We've given it all. They would not tell themselves no. Then you have the last. You have Peter and the apostles. You see the scenes of the apostles as you read through. It was not just Peter, but it was Peter and some of the apostles. And Peter, he told people no. We ought to obey God rather than men. Didn't we tell you, verse 28 of Acts 5, not to teach in this one's name again? He told them the answer was no. Now you may be sitting here wondering, well, what in the world does that have to do with me? Well, let me ask you this. The English word no, 2 letters, N-O. Pretty simple, right? I really wish I could have pronounced some of the most difficult words to say, but I ain't trying. I'll give you all the list if you want to try to pronounce them. They're hard. Took me about 3 seconds to go, nope. But how hard is it to say no? Let me ask you this. How hard is it to tell our children no? I don't know if your children have this ability to do this to you. I am learning that mine are learning it, and I want to just squash it. I don't know if y'all know this. You'll understand what I'm saying. You ever seen them when you tell them no, they put those eyes up in that right spot, and they get the quiver in the voice. But please. How hard is it to tell your kids no when they're looking at you, but please? Maybe they're in trouble and they know that punishment is on the way. Please, no. How hard is it to tell your children no? It's a difficult word, isn't it? How hard is it to tell yourself no? You ever done this? You ever convinced yourself that nobody was going to know the K-N-O-W? Nobody's going to know. Nobody's going to know. How about this? You ever told yourself this? Everybody's doing it. Boy, that one has convinced us, hasn't it? Nobody's going to know. Everybody's doing it. How hard is it to tell yourself no? How hard is it to tell others no? Whether it be those at work or those in your home, husband to wife, wife to husband, parents to children. How hard is it to tell someone in the church no? Oh. Now we're building the case of the most difficult word. Back to Pharaoh. He's the most interesting case, at least to me, with the concept of no. He told God no. Joseph, he told himself no. Ananias, a husband and wife, would not tell themselves no. Peter, he looked to the world that had just put him in prison with others, and he told them no. It's easy to pronounce, isn't it? But boy, it's hard to say. It's hard to deal with. Because the word no is almost like you're pushing a very heavy object up some stairs. And sometimes we think the easiest thing to do is just to do nothing. I'll say nothing, I'll do nothing, and I'll just get by. I'll just get by. Maybe we use this phrase to convince ourselves of that. Nobody's going to know. Or maybe this one. That's somebody else's job. You see, this simple little word for these four people was very difficult. Now, we've looked at two evil, Pharaoh and Ananias and Sapphira. They seem to do it pretty easy. But we also looked at Joseph and Peter, and they seem to do it pretty easy. I guess I have a question to ask with the most difficult word. What makes it hard? You see, Pharaoh, who is the Lord? I don't know him. I don't want to know him. I will not let your people go. What made it easy for Pharaoh? He thought he was in control. You ever felt like you were in control? Ananias and Sapphira. We're still doing a good thing, right? We're still doing a good thing. But they needed to tell themselves no. Why was it so hard for them to do that? I guess they felt like they were in control. Joseph, he's one of my favorite character studies of the Old Testament because he's able to see something that you and I rarely see. God meant it for good. What made it so easy for him to tell himself no? He knew that his God cared. Peter is my favorite character study of the New Testament. What made it so easy for Peter, who had just been released from prison the night before, to stand before a crowd who wanted to put him to death and say we ought to obey God rather than men? What made it so easy for Peter? He knew the one who cared. I guess what we're studying tonight is not really the word know, is it? It's who you know. Pharaoh and Ananias and Sapphira, they only knew themselves. They were in control, and they found out that they weren't. Joseph and Peter and the other apostles, they knew who was in control, and they reassured themselves that he was. I guess it's not about the word know. It's about who you know. And thus I have said all of that to ask this one simple question. For every person that's in this room tonight, who do you know? Who do you know? And that will determine how we face the most difficult word to say by using 4 illustrations for our consideration. Now, with that in mind, I want to share with you something that I think is very important. You might be tempted tonight to say no. What I mean is this. Maybe you recognize that you need to become a Christian, but you, like those in the days gone by, have said, not today. No. Our waiting does not change the Bible information about what one must do to be saved. Now, we can delay it, we can put it off, but here's the truth. We don't know tomorrow. So we might be tempted tonight to say, not today, not tonight. Tell me of this another day. That would be much like Pharaoh and Ananias and Sapphira. It would be an inappropriate use of no. Maybe you're already a Christian and you know there's doubt in your life or there's sin in your life or you need prayers, but you say this, you justify it, because we all try to justify things in our lives. You say, but I don't want to be embarrassed. You know what you've done? You've told yourself no. But I don't want anybody to know. You know what you've done? You told yourself no. You see, before we realize it, we might be tempted to say something that causes us to be separated from God. So I ask you this question again. Who do you know? Who do you know? That's what our 2 did tonight. Joseph and Peter and the rest of the apostles. They knew exactly who God is. So who do you know? If you tonight need to become a Christian or make your life right with the Lord, we're going to sing an invitation song. It's been selected. Don't tell yourself no tonight. Don't tell yourself no. Don't tell God no. But whatever it may be, whether you need to become a Christian or make your life right with the Lord, let's stand, sing, and respond accordingly.
Oh, do not let the word depart, and enclose thine eyes in the stars. For sinner, harden not the heart, be saved, O tonight. Oh, why not tonight, not tonight, not tonight? Oh, why not tonight? hadn't had the opportunity to take the Lord's Supper today, it'll be served in the fellowship hall. That's through the door to my left. If you'll pass that way during this final song. Number 18. 18, blessed be the tie. Blessed be the tie.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight in prayer with thankful hearts. You letting us come to worship and be together. We ask that you be with the sick so they may have good health. As we go home, may we have safety and look forward to a good week. In Christ's name we pray, amen.